Just another night on the Ingram angle. Breaking news throughout the hour up until the final whistle. That Joseph Crowley story is huge. The woman who beat him is basically a total socialist, unabashed socialist. That's where the Democrat Party is going. If you didn't see the angle tonight, we're going to post it tonight. You got to watch it. Follow me on Twitter. I'll see you on radio tomorrow. Love to read your tweets, remember. And Fox News, the team, Fox News at night, Shannon Bream. Up next, Shannon.
Hey, and Laura, that young woman that it looks like upended Joe Crowley, we started making calls, our team did, to try to get comments from Democrats. They don't have any contact information for her. So it's taken a lot of people by surprise. We'll have more on that coming up. Laura, thank you very much.
Take care.
All right, we begin with a Fox News alert. Republicans preparing to take another run at an immigration bill on Capitol Hill as activists shut down traffic in New York City tonight over the Supreme Court's decision to uphold President Trump's travel ban. This is 3.0. We've got reaction from the White House. Mercedes Schlapp joins us live. Plus, election results pouring in from 7 states. We're live in South Carolina and Utah with the very latest from today's primary races. And it could be a major shock to the Democratic Party. It does appear that top-ranking Congressman Joe Crowley will lose his primary race to a 28-year-old Latina community organizer who is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. What does it mean for Democrats in the blue wave? We've got extensive coverage tonight. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We start with the fallout across the country from 2 major Supreme Court decisions. One, a victory for the Trump administration, at least in the short term. The other, the latest win for social conservatives. We've got team coverage tonight. Trace Gallagher from our LA newsroom covering a blow to California lawmakers who wanted to force pro-life pregnancy centers to provide information to clients about where they could get abortions. But first, Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry has some breaking news from Capitol Hill in the wake of that travel ban ruling. Good evening, Ed.
Shannon, good to talk to you. Breaking tonight, some key House Republicans are telling us they're not likely to have the votes to pass major immigration reform legislation tomorrow. So President Trump's best shot at cracking down on illegal immigration may be trying, at least, to build on this Supreme Court victory by taking on more executive action. The president certainly signaled he wants more aggressive action as he reacted triumphantly today, declaring this was a moment of, quote, profound vindication over one of his signature policies. And he said we must be tough about vetting who's coming into the country. The narrow 5-4 decision by the court may not open the door to vast new executive power in terms of crafting immigration policy, since the court was ruling on whether an injunction against a travel ban can stand. So now it actually has to go back to a lower court where they'll decide on the merits. But in his opinion, on behalf of the majority, the Chief Justice John Roberts did assert the president has significant legal authority to make immigration decisions to keep the nation safe, writing, quote, by its plain language, federal law grants the president broad discretion to suspend the entry of aliens into the United States. Now, Roberts and the rest of the majority on the court stressed they only looked at the text of this executive order, which says nothing about religion, and they did not consider the president's tweets and public statements about cracking down on Muslims. In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor invoked the 1944 Korematsu ruling that upheld a presidential directive ordering Japanese Americans into internment camps. She said if the court had considered the president's statements in this case, quote, a reasonable observer would conclude that the proclamation was motivated by anti-Muslim animus. But since this is the third version, as you noted, of the executive order, it's watered down. It includes 2 non-Muslim countries, North Korea and Venezuela, and the Muslim majority countries included in this executive order only cover about 8% of Muslims around the world. Yet the reaction from the first 2 Muslims elected to Congress, Keith Ellison and Andre Carson, suggested otherwise. Watch.
This is a great victory for our Constitution. We have to be tough, and we have to be safe, and we have to be secure.
You can how this can be applied in other areas. This seems to be a rubber stamp Supreme Court when it comes to the president's most odious and ugly discriminatory impulses.
It's impossible to remove people who come here from war-torn areas, who are fleeing dictators, to say you can't come here when we claim to be the country of free, the land of the brave.
Now, in April, the advocacy group CARE claimed that hate crimes targeting American Muslims had risen 15% in 2017, and they blamed the president's travel ban. White House spokeswoman Kelly Love responded the administration was standing for the rule of law and is against all forms of lawlessness, including hate crimes. And by the way, a 2017 survey by the Pew Research Center that analyzed FBI numbers found that assaults against Muslims in the U.S. had risen significantly between 2015 and 2016. Obviously, that was before the travel ban, and that was when Barack Obama was president, Shannon.
All right, Ed, thank you very much. But the travel ban case doesn't end here because the court was specifically ruling on whether an injunction against the travel ban can stand. So now, with all of today's guidance from the court, it goes back to the lower court for a decision on the merits. Let's talk about it with our legal eagles tonight. Former Chief Counsel to Senator Dianne Feinstein, Neil Quinter, and Chief Counsel for Judicial Crisis Network, Harry Severino. Welcome to you both. Big day at the court. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of the majority opinion here. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, writing for the 5-4 majority, the proclamation is expressly premised on legitimate purposes, preventing entry of nationals who cannot be adequately vetted and inducing other nations to improve their practices. The text says nothing about religion. Neil, he said this was within the president's powers under the law and based on just the text of the proclamation.
Well, the problem is that there's a whole lot more to the story than the text of the proclamation, which Justice Sotomayor pointed out powerfully in her dissent. I mean, Donald Trump made anti-Muslim statements month in and month out through the campaign and into the beginning of his presidency. He said he wanted to have a Muslim ban, a ban on Muslims entering into the country, and then he asked Rudy Giuliani to figure out a way to do it legally. So it's just not enough to just read the text. The Supreme Court's got a history in prior cases of looking at, was there an improper anti-religious motive behind the order, the motive to discriminate against an unfavored religion.
Yeah, and what they did was essentially today look and say, without all of that factored in, Carrie, is there enough to show us that what he did on its face was legitimate? They found yes. But as Neil points out, Justice Sotomayor had a really scathing dissent today. Both she and Justice Breyer read from their dissents from the bench. She said this: the president's statements, which the majority utterly fails to address in its legal analysis, strongly support the conclusion that the proclamation was issued to express hostility toward Muslims and exclude them from the country.
The reason the court didn't address those is because that's not the legal standard. They're trying to apply the same standard we apply to all presidents' executive orders. You don't get a new higher standard because it's President Trump, because they find his statements offensive, or because they don't like his policies. You have to apply the same standard, and those standards simply give the president an extensive amount of discretion and authority when it comes to national security issues, both constitutionally and then the statutory authority here is really at its peak. And especially in this case, which in the third version, you have interdepartmental review. A lot of analysis went into choosing which countries and for what specific reasons. This is not some back of the envelope, let's find some way to do that. This is something that a lot of time and research went into. So this is not just President Trump coming up with something. It was a huge team throughout the administration. And the president simply has a great deal of authority here to make sure that for national security reasons, we understand who is coming into this country.
Okay, tomorrow we expect that the term will wrap up. It'll be the first full term for Justice Neil Gorsuch, the newest justice. I want to ask you both to weigh in on his presence on the term this year, including this case, the travel ban case today, how his presence has impacted the court's decisions. Neil, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, it's a 5-4 decision. This is probably the starkest example of how the Republican blockade of Judge Garland has led to a different outcome in this case, a case where the president is able to take extreme actions in an unchecked fashion. Had the Republicans given Judge Garland the vote that he deserved, it's highly likely that there would have been a different outcome today.
I think, Carrie, that's probably fair to say that this would have been, first of all, you wouldn't have a President Trump, so you wouldn't be making this particular decision. But how do you think that Justice Gorsuch's presence has impacted the court this term?
Well, he's had an amazing impact. I think, even if Garland had a vote, that doesn't mean he would have been confirmed, certainly. So I think what we've seen here, though, is Gorsuch has had a term that showed President Trump has fulfilled his promise. He said he wanted to put someone in the mold of Justice Scalia, who'd be fair, who'd be independent, who'd be impartial, who would apply the law as it's written, the Constitution as it's originally understood. That's what Gorsuch has done time and time again. That's where he's brought the court in oral arguments and in his opinions. So I couldn't be more pleased with seeing the outcome of this term.
I think Neil's getting hives over there. Okay, let me ask you both quickly, because we're watching and waiting tomorrow for possibly, or not at all, the announcement of any retirement. There's this speculation that goes wild last year. It's going wild again this year. Neil, yes or no? Do you think anybody goes?
I have a terrible track record of predicting retirements. I never think anybody's going to retire, and then they do. So, God, can I plead the fifth?
Okay, you can definitely take the fifth. What do you think, Carrie? I mean, because I felt like last year there was more of a chance that Justice Kennedy would go. It doesn't feel this way that he will, but only he knows. We don't know what we'll get tomorrow or even later this week.
Yeah, I think that's right. Only Justice Kennedy knows. He's the one who's going to make that call. I think the important thing here is President Trump not only has had his great track record on appointments so far, but he has an amazing list of some of the best and brightest young lawyers and judges coming up in the country. I would just be so pleased to know that whenever a vacancy arises, his team is ready, and we're going to have an excellent nominee.
And Neil hopes none of those come anytime soon.
Well, it's interesting just to mention Justice Kennedy. If you read the opinions, everybody seemed to be making a play for Justice Kennedy and their opinions. Both the majority and the Sotomayor dissent cited his concurring opinions. You could almost see the battle that had been playing out.
And because he's really been the swing vote in so many key cases in the last few years, maybe he stays and continues enjoying that role. We'll see.
I hope so.
Thank you both for coming in. All right, another 5-4 decision today. Major victory for social conservatives. The Supreme Court ruling in favor of pro-life pregnancy centers, which, thanks to California law, were essentially being forced to refer or at least provide information to clients about abortions. Not exactly in line with their mission. Trace Gallagher covering the fallout from that ruling tonight. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. At question is the California Freedom, Accountability, Comprehensive Care and Transparency Act, better known as the FACT Act. It was passed in 2015 and mandates that pregnancy facilities put up 8.5 by 11-inch signs notifying women that low-cost prenatal care and abortions are available. Facilities that don't comply can face steep fines. The legislation triggered a flurry of lawsuits, and a religious nonprofit actually won its case on the state level, but on the federal level, the lawsuits went nowhere. Then the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates, or NIFLA, claimed the law violates First Amendment rights to free speech and free exercise of religion. Watch.
Nobody should be compelled to speak a message with which they fundamentally disagree and which their conscience violates. And if the government can do that, everybody is subject.
But the Ninth Circuit Court, widely viewed as liberal, rejected both arguments, and the Supreme Court agreed only to review the free speech argument. In today's 5-4 ruling in favor of the pro-life pregnancy centers, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote that the lower courts did not apply the proper degree of scrutiny to California's FACT Act. But Justice Anthony Kennedy went much further, calling out California, writing, quote, "The state requires primarily pro-life pregnancy centers to promote the state's own preferred message, advertising abortions," going on to say, quoting, "Governments must not be allowed to force persons to express a message contrary to their deepest convictions. Freedom of speech secures freedom of thought and belief." California Attorney General Javier Becerra called the ruling unfortunate, saying all California women deserve, quote, "critical and non-biased information." And some liberal comedians didn't find the decision very humorous. Liz Winstead called the pro-life centers fake clinics. And Patton Oswalt retweeted an article about today's ruling saying, quote, "Trump getting elected will spark a revolution." It appears he did not mean that in a positive light. Shannon.
I'm guessing no. All right, Trace Gallagher on the West Coast, thank you very much. So on the one hand, the left claims the highest court in the land is endorsing lying to patients as an acceptable health care practice. And on the other hand, that the travel ban ruling equates to some of the darkest days in American history. So let's get reaction from White House Director of Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp. Welcome and good evening.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, what is the mood in the White House tonight? First, let's start with the travel ban.
Well, I have to tell you, I mean, President Trump and the team, they feel victorious. This is a very important night for the safety and security of the American people. I mean, clearly what we have seen is that the Supreme Court, this ruling affirmed the legality of what President Trump pushed forward in terms of his critical actions here. So I think when you look at the fact that these travel restrictions really emphasize the fact that this is something that is focused on those countries that we know didn't meet those minimum standards. So this raises this global minimal standard when it comes to having the right information, to making sure we know who's coming into our country. And so that, in essence, is important because it's forced countries like Chad to meet that minimum requirement. So then we know exactly what information that we're sharing and exactly who is coming into our country. celebrate a big success when it comes to national security for America.
And Chad got itself off the list because it did comply with these requirements, so it's now off the list. Okay, let's hear from one of the top Democrats in the Senate, Dick Durbin, his reaction to this ruling today.
We need to keep out every dangerous person who tries to come to this country. But to categorically brand people because of their religion or their background, what country they're from, is just not the way we should do things in America.
Now, the majority didn't find it that way. They said there's no mention of religion in the text. Of course, the dissent was very upset because of things that the president has said. They said they should have been factored in. They say his motive was clear in keeping people out strictly on the basis of religion.
Which, I mean, when you look at the list itself, it includes countries like Venezuela, it includes countries like North Korea. This doesn't have to do at all with religion. These countries that were picked, many of them came from those that Congress and the Obama administration had posed as those countries that posed serious national security threats. Clearly, we saw that Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, the director of the National Intelligence, they did a worldwide review. They evaluated over 200 countries to say you need to have the accurate information that needs to be shared in order to determine which citizens can come into and out of our country. And I think that is a safety standard, that minimum safety requirement that we need. Not only does it help our country, but it also helps those countries to better improve their vetting system.
Too, yes, and that's something the Chief Justice noted as well. I want to ask you about this California case as well, because Justice Thomas authored that 5-4 opinion saying basically these pro-life pregnancy centers in California that are being forced to either refer people or tell them where they can go get abortions, which is completely against the mission of what they're trying to do, or have these numerous large disclosures in multiple languages and in font size, all kinds of things that other clinics that aren't pro-life pregnancy centers didn't have to do. They've sent this case back saying they think the plaintiffs have a good chance of winning and challenging and defeating this California law. A lot of folks say that kind of ruling would have never happened without the nomination and appointment of Justice Gorsuch, and note that this president has nominated a lot of judges that are viewed as pro-life, conservative, and that they are applauding him. Conservatives are for fulfilling that promise to them.
I mean, it has been an amazing over 500 days of what I would say American great success when it comes to President Trump, whether it be on economic security, national security, and one of his greatest legacies will be this appointment of Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch. There is no question. In addition to those circuit court judges that have been appointed, a record number of them that we have right now. And again, it's taking it back to the strict constitutionalism, the fact that we don't want to see activist judges. We want to make sure that the judicial system has its role, and then you have the legislative system that should be making those laws. So I think that for the role Gorsuch has played has been, I think, instrumental in the Supreme Court, and it is really taking it back to what is the true face of the law and the Constitution.
Not surprised, you won't be surprised, that a number of pro-choice groups are sounding the alarm, saying that this is the most disastrous and dangerous. They call it a dangerous threat to women's health. They're firing back and saying that we've got to take on this president and anyone who supports him. It's a theme that we've heard from a number of folks on the Hill. There's been a lot of rancor on both sides, people going after Republicans and Democrats. How are you feeling as a member of this administration? Are you worried about someone busting up your dinner or showing up at your house?
Well, I have to tell you, I spend every day with Sarah Sanders, and I think the experiences that we have seen, that she experienced even this past weekend, is just so incredibly unfortunate. I mean, especially when it's Sarah with her family trying to have a private moment and being able to just spend time with her family. God only knows that we're in the White House. We don't get a lot of quality time and a lot of free time. And so what concerns me is this tone of inciting violence, this tone of just harassing anyone who is working for the Trump administration. And more so, I mean, you have to remember, we take on this role of being public servants. We are there to serve the American people, and we are there to help President Trump do his job, which he has done very successfully. I mean, he has a vision. We help him implement that. And so, you know, let's get back to the days where you can have that debate and healthy discussion and civility. And I think if we can get there, I think it helps our country heal. Because I tell you something, President Trump, he's a president of all Americans. And that's what he focuses on every day. Every time we see those unemployment numbers go down for Hispanics, African Americans, and really you start seeing the manufacturing jobs coming back. You know, you see these success stories, this economic boom. And I have to tell you, it's because President Trump is focused on all Americans. And that's what I know individuals like Sarah and those of us on our team that work very hard day in and day out. Let them do their jobs. They're there to serve the American people.
He doesn't mind stirring it up a little bit, though, too.
It makes it
keeps it interesting. All right, Mercedes, thanks for dropping in.
Thank you.
Good to see you. All right, it is primary day in 7 states. We've got results, including a big upset in New York. Plus, we're in South Carolina, where President Trump just threw his support behind Governor McMaster. So how'd that go in his runoff election? We'll also head to Utah, where former presidential candidate Mitt Romney, who's locked horns with the president, trying to win the Republican nomination to come here and serve in the Senate.
If I get to Washington, as I hope I do, then I'm going to be with the president on policies that I think are right for America and for my state.
This is a Fox News alert. Brand new results right now in a big primary night in 7 states across the nation. In New York, the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Congressman Joe Crowley, losing to a 28-year-old Bernie Sanders organizer who was endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster warding off a political test after getting a big endorsement from President Trump last night. Then there is Utah, where it appears Mitt Romney is on his way to a political comeback, clinching a win tonight, using a new path behind an old foe turned ally, President Trump, to get back to Washington. In the race for Colorado governor, Congressman Jared Polis winning the Democratic primary. He will face Republican Walker Stapleton, a relative of former President George W. Bush. In Maryland, former NAACP President Ben Jealous will take on incumbent Republican Governor Larry Hogan in November. There are notable measures on some of the ballots, like deep red Oklahoma, which is now one of the most conservative states we understand to legalize medical marijuana. Team coverage on all of the elections tonight. Dan Springer is in Utah at Mitt Romney's headquarters, but we begin with Jonathan Seri in South Carolina. Jonathan.
Hi, Shannon. Here at the watch party, an enthusiastic crowd cheered as they saw the results come in, showing Henry McMaster with a 2-digit lead in his GOP primary runoff. Watch.
As President Trump says, we gonna keep on winning, winning, winning in South Carolina. Winning, winning, winning.
Both McMaster and his challenger, Greenville businessman and combat vet John Warren, are loyal supporters of the Trump agenda. Warren had hoped to capitalize on his status as a political outsider to win the runoff, but it was ultimately McMaster's early support of Trump's 2016 bid for the White House that won the president's endorsement. Mr. Trump flew to South Carolina yesterday to join McMaster at a campaign event. Tonight, as the election results came in, here's how both candidates reacted.
Tonight was not our night, but I am confident over the years to come that the conservative movement will continue to grow, it will continue to get stronger, and we're going to come up with conservative reform solutions to all of our problems to make our state great.
The team that we have in South Carolina is a big team. It's a broad team. And I want to thank all those candidates who've run. I especially want to thank John Warren. He ran a good, strong race, and I salute that military service.
Moments ago, President Trump tweeted, "Congratulations to Governor Henry McMaster on your big election win. South Carolina loves you. We are proud of you." And Peggy, of course, being the First Lady of South Carolina. Now the governor can go into the general election in which he faces Democrat James Smith in November. Shannon?
All right, Jonathan, thank you very much. Over to Utah now, where former presidential candidate Mitt Romney is eyeing a political comeback. Dan Springer is live at Romney headquarters with the latest tonight. Hey, Dan.
Yeah, hey, Shannon. And Mitt Romney took a big step towards getting a job in Washington. Maybe not the one that he really wanted, at least, but he is taking a big step today by a big victory in the Republican primary for Senate, the seat that was vacated by the soon retirement of Orrin Hatch. We have the numbers, and with very few votes left to count, Mitt Romney has a commanding 74% to 26% lead over Mike Kennedy. A victory party here in Orem, Utah, outside of Provo. A short time ago, Governor Romney addressed his supporters here, and he said, in order to be great, you have to first be good.
If I'm lucky enough to become United States Senator from the great state of Utah, I will do everything in my power to keep America strong, to make sure that our economy is prosperous for our kids and our grandkids, and also to make sure that the example I set as a leader is consistent with the great values of our state.
This primary victory is totally expected. A poll taken a couple of weeks ago showed him with a 42% lead. Mike Kennedy tried to paint Romney as a carpetbagger, but that never stuck. Romney is a high-profile Mormon in a state that is over half Mormon. He's credited with saving the 2002 Winter Olympic Games in Salt Lake City, and he's lived in Utah for 10 years. The big national question, of course, for Romney is, will he be a big critic of President Trump?
If I get to Washington, I will work with him and with the policies I think are right. I will oppose those things I think are wrong for the country or for the state, and I'll speak my mind on issues of conscience.
Romney had a big feud with Trump, famous feud in 2016. The attacks back and forth were vicious. Name-calling on Twitter was off the charts. But after Trump won, Romney stood down. The two men actually met when he was considered for Secretary of State. Trump endorsed Romney in this primary. Well, Romney recently predicted Trump would win re-election because 90% of Republicans say they support him and the economy is good. But Romney has occasionally been critical of Trump's tone with opponents, and he was against separating families at the border. But as far as advising Trump, no way.
Separate branches. My job is to try and get things through the legislative branch that are right for the country. I'm not going to try and manage the White House or how the president interacts with others. That's up to him and his administration and his team.
Romney now takes on Democrat Jenny Wilson, who he will have a big advantage over in the polls very, very soon. Back to you.
All right, Dan Springer, thank you very much. Well, more on that big upset in New York. We've got Clinton pollster Mark Penn here live, plus an update on mobs going after their political opponents. Plus, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, you've seen this, maybe confronted by student activists calling for the abolition of ICE. Meanwhile, a reporter is berated at a rally for the president, but what else happened after that? Our panel's here to weigh in. This is a Fox News alert, a major upset in New York. The chair of the House Democratic Caucus, he's the number 4 in the House, Congressman Joe Crowley, losing by what appears to be a pretty wide margin tonight to a 28-year-old Bernie Sanders organizer who was endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America. Vogue has this to say about her. 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez might just be the future of the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, the National Republican Congressional Committee says tonight House Democrats hoping for a post-Pelosi era are now left leaderless. The only person happier tonight than Nancy Pelosi is the NRCC. Well, let's bring in former pollster and advisor to President Clinton, Mark Penn, and contributing editor at the Daily Caller, Derek Hunter. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Mark, I will start with you. I mean, this is a young woman who, there's a tweet out there tonight of her showing her a year ago, tending bar, kind of a political unknown. And now here she is. She's been a Bernie Sanders supporter. She's for universal health care, federal jobs for everyone, all kinds of pretty far left ideas. And she has upended the number 4 Democrat in the House.
Well, look, this is an upset in the finest tradition of upsets. I think a candidate who's not expected to win, who's got some strong views against somebody who's been there a very long time, who somehow spent $3 million and didn't get his vote out. I mean, if you look at the number of votes there, there's 26,000 votes in a district that's probably 90% Democratic. So in reality, very few people voted. She did a great job organizing. And she won. Look, some other challenges of the left, like against Lipinski in Chicago, were beaten back. Here's one where the left picked one up and knocked off somebody who really, frankly, had really gotten out of sync with his district.
All right, Derek, how do you think this plays out in the fall? I mean, it sounds like it's a district that will clearly stay Democrat. So if that holds and she comes here to Capitol Hill, it's really now an influx of somebody who is pretty far left. I mean, endorsed by the Democratic Socialists and somebody who has ideas that sound very much in that vein.
She will be a backbencher that doesn't really get a whole lot done, but she'll be vocal. She will be a hit on the cable news circuit. She'll be a media celebrity, but she won't exactly be an effective member of Congress. You're turning over somebody in leadership who could get things done for somebody new, a Democratic Socialist of all people, who can't get things done. No new member of Congress can get things done. I'm not exactly heartbroken about it. I think it's kind of funny that Frankenstein's monster always returns to the castle. The left has preached identity politics. They've preached tribalism. They now have become a victim of that. They're number 4 in the House. This is a majority-minority district. He thought he was a good progressive, and that was all he needed to do, was say the right things and support the right things. He certainly was no moderate by any stretch of the imagination. But the idea of a white man representing that district was a bridge too far for many. And so they lost. He got hoisted in his own petard in many ways. I think it's kind of a beautiful thing.
Okay. All right. Mark, what do you make about this? Because we've seen this playing out in other places, like in California, where Senator Dianne Feinstein, a long mainstay leadership of the Democrats in the Senate, wasn't even endorsed by her own party there in California because they felt like she was too centrist, and they went with somebody who was much further to the left.
Well, but most of these challenges have been beaten back. I think if you look at the overall season, the Democrats come out with a pretty good group. I mean, look, the Republicans right now are completely leaderless. They don't have a message. They have a leader who's quit but won't quit. I don't even know how they run a campaign. They're behind, I think, 7 or 8 points in the overall horse race.
They run a campaign based on full employment and 4% growth that the left said was impossible just 2 years ago. That's how you run a campaign.
Well, but I think most of the public sees that the Republicans have been unable, even amongst themselves and even with a majority, to solve problems and move legislation. And this week, look, when the crisis arose over what was happening at the border, the congressional Republicans froze, and the president had to come in and do an executive order.
Right, but what is the Democratic solution? It's to open the border. It's to anger the mob. I detail this in my book, how they just keep people angry to prevent people from thinking. That seems to be the liberal mantra, is keep the mob riled up, keep people emotional to override logic, and hope to God that whatever violence naturally springs from an angry mob around the country waits until after the election. The Democrats seem to be playing a game of chicken with November, that they can keep this mob angry and motivated through November, but keep it from becoming violent. I don't think that's going to be possible.
This is not what we're seeing here. This is a dynamic young person who overthrew someone who'd been in the district a long time, lost a bit of touch. This is a classic upset. It's classic New York politics. And we don't know what kind of congresswoman she will be. Well, let's give her a chance.
All right, we will see. By the way, Mark has written a very interesting piece about social media mobs and all kinds of things that are going on that are upsetting American discourse and our ability to try to meet each other in the middle and get something done. It's a great piece. Derek, congrats on the new book and the success of that as well. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, as Harley-Davidson moves jobs overseas, we look at the motorcycle maker's long history of welcoming government help in tough times.
The Harley-Davidson example makes a very strong statement about how government, through the judicious application of our trade laws, can help the best and the brightest in American management and labor come together.
Meanwhile, Republican leaders reportedly want to triple the number of low-skilled workers allowed to flow into the country as they try to get together enough votes for a so-called compromise immigration bill due on the House floor for a vote tomorrow. Will it work? We'll ask former GOP Congressman Jason Chaffetz if he thinks it's a good idea. He's live next. President Trump warning motorcycle manufacturer Harley-Davidson today, telling the company, quote, it will be the beginning of the end, and threatening to tax them if they follow through with moving some production overseas in order to avoid new EU tariffs. Well, Garrett Tenney takes a look back at the iconic American company's relationship with the government.
In the 1960s and 70s, America's sole motorcycle manufacturer was facing new competition as Japanese bike makers flooded the U.S. with smaller, faster, and less expensive bikes. By 1983, Harley-Davidson was heading towards bankruptcy until President Ronald Reagan stepped in, drastically raising tariffs on Japanese motorcycles from 4% to nearly 50% in order to save the iconic American brand. 4 years later, Harley-Davidson was thriving, and President Reagan ended the tariffs.
You asked us to give you breathing room so you could finish getting into shape to meet unexpectedly strong foreign competition. Like America, Harley is back and standing tall.
Like the rest of the U.S. economy, Harley-Davidson grew throughout the 90s before running into hard times during the economic recession. But once again, in 2008 and 2009, the U.S. government stepped in, handing the bike manufacturer more than $2 billion as part of a bailout package for Wall Street. More recently, the company set its sights on growing its international market, with the goal of international sales making up half of its total business. Last year, Harley-Davidson broke ground on a new factory in Thailand, adding to ones in Brazil, India, and Australia. Then in January, the company closed its assembly plant in Kansas City, saying at the time, we are constantly evaluating capacity and our current U.S. capacity exceeds U.S. demand. On Monday, Harley announced it planned to move some production outside of the U.S. to escape retaliatory tariffs from the European Union after President Trump hit the trade bloc with tariffs on steel and aluminum last month. But today, the president said the iconic American company is using the trade dispute as an excuse to lay off American workers.
They announced it early this year, so Harley-Davidson is using that as an excuse. And I don't like that because I've been very good to Harley-Davidson, and they used it as an excuse. And I think the people that ride Harleys are not happy with Harley-Davidson, and I wouldn't be either.
Harley-Davidson's announcement is fueling an effort by some Republican lawmakers who are pushing for legislation that would limit the president's ability to unilaterally enact tariffs under the guise of national security, and are threatening to block the president's judicial nominations until GOP leaders allow a vote on that measure. Today, their efforts got a big boost as a coalition of some of the biggest business groups in the country came out in support of the legislation. So far, though, GOP leaders have shut down any attempts to advance that idea, so don't hold your breath.
Okay, well, keep us updated.
You got it.
Garrett Tenney, thank you very much. All right, this is a Fox News alert just coming in. A federal judge is ordering the federal government to reunite migrant parents with children taken from them under the Trump administration's family separation policy. It appears at our first read of this injunction that it requires nearly all children younger than 5 be reunited with their parents within 14 days and that older children 5 and older be returned within 30 days. Fox News contributor and former Republican congressman from Utah, Jason Chaffetz, is here to weigh in on that, especially as they try to get something done in the House tomorrow on immigration. Jason, thanks for being with us tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I know you won't be surprised to find that this ruling comes from within the Ninth Circuit. It comes from the San Diego area, I believe, in Southern California. But essentially, it sounds like what the judge is saying at a quick read of this, that these kids have to be put back together with their parents. My understanding is that they would be anyway. It's just a matter of time. This sounds like it's trying to expedite the process.
Yeah, look, the Trump administration is trying to do this. It's been the long-time policy. This was something that happened during President Obama's time. This separation, and the word that needs to get out to the people who do want to come to this country: don't let the first act that you do be breaking the laws of the United States of America. Go to the United States Embassy in your country of origin. Go to a port of entry, and you won't have any of these problems. But if you're going to cross the border, break the law, get detained by Border Patrol, there are consequences to that. And I know they're working as hard as they can to reunify these kids, but don't break the law and it won't happen in the first place.
Okay, so they're trying to get something done in the House with regard to immigration. The so-called compromise bill is supposed to come back to the floor tomorrow. Tonight we hear this. Stephen Dinan writing in the Washington Times, GOP leaders have added a massive infusion of low-skilled foreign workers to their immigration bill Tuesday, hoping to win over reluctant Republicans with business-friendly provisions. The number of low-skilled seasonal workers will be allowed to triple under the new plan. What do you make of that as a strategy for getting more people to sign on?
It's a Hail Mary pass late in the fourth quarter. I think it's going to fall far short. Talking to people, my former colleagues, they think it'll be, maybe it'll get 150 votes. It's a shame because I think the tactics. Yeah, oh yeah, I can't imagine. Look, if it was an easy fix a long time ago, they would have done it. But I think the tactics of the way they've dealt with this has just been abysmal. Everybody's been upset about it and frustrated about it. I want there to be as many votes as possible. I think you should put people on the record, but one issue at a time. And if you're suddenly going to throw the ag worker component on top of it, there are a lot of people I believe we need a guest worker program, but we need to be able to make sure that when they come to this country legally and lawfully, that they exit the country. 40% of the people that are here illegally came here legally. But if you're not going to institute some other things, then you're going to have these problems. But to add it in the last 48 hours, I think is a show of desperation.
Well, we'll see who it benefits or hurts as we get closer to the midterm elections. But your prediction is that tomorrow they get fewer votes than they did on the so-called conservative Goodlatte bill last week, which didn't get close to the 218 or the 215 they need with some.
Or they pull it. Or they may look at that whip count and say, we're not going to take that loss. Yeah. That's a huge one.
All right, Jason, thanks for being with us. Up next, the Real News Roundup. With Me Too, the movement is now vaulting the United States into the top 10 most dangerous nations for women, along with Somalia, India, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and others. Thomson Reuters news agency surveying more than 550 experts in women's issues. They claim America deserves to be listed because of increased awareness of sexual coercion and harassment in the workplace. President Trump again blasting the media over alleged fake news, this time accusing the press of faking sources after a report by the Wall Street Journal over proposed investment restrictions that are part of the ongoing trade battle against China. The Journal is standing firm behind its reporting. The president says this.
It was either a bad leak by somebody that didn't know, but probably they just made up the story. There was no leak. I've been a long term. I'm not sure if my political friends would agree, but I think a lot of leaks aren't leaks. They're made up by the writers. They don't exist, the leak.
California officials are calling on the state's Attorney General, Javier Becerra, to create a panel that would combat fake news. Under a new Senate bill, a fake news advisory panel would include state officials and representatives from social media companies that would monitor your online postings for false information and study how that information gets spread. Filmmaker David Lynch says the Guardian newspaper took him out of context when he said President Trump could go down as one of the greatest presidents in history. Lynch clarifying his remarks on Facebook, writing, "Unfortunately, if you continue as you have been, you will not have a chance to go down in history as a great president," though Lynch says it is not too late to turn the ship around. Well, tonight's Midnight Hero, President Trump awarding the highest military honor, the Medal of Honor, posthumously to First Lieutenant Garland Merle Connor in a White House ceremony this afternoon. On January 24th, 1945, Connor's battalion was attacked by 600 German troops armed with tank destroyers. Instead of retreating, he ran into enemy territory with a telephone directing artillery fire. He then hid in a ditch for 3 hours until the battle was won. Connor, whose wife accepted the medal, died 20 years ago today. A true hero. Most watched, most trusted, most grateful you spent your evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.